On the Navy's ships around the world, there are a whole lot of personnel gaps. The Navy says it averaged about 18,000 empty billets over the past year. The cause is pretty straightforward: not enough sailors. Officials say this year is looking better than last year, but like most of the other services, the Navy still faces big recruiting challenges. We get details from Federal News Network's Jared Serbu.
In 2023, the Navy missed its recruiting goal by about 7,000 sailors. Nonetheless, officials say the picture does appear to be improving. Last year, the service onboarded 6,000 more uniformed service members than it did in 2022. And so far this year, it's about 2,900 recruits ahead of where it was at the same point in 2023. But Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro says it's not been enough to close manpower gaps at sea, so more recruits are needed.
And it is all hands on deck. But I want to be clear. We're not going to be 16,000 sailors short. We may be somewhere between less than 6,200, and I think it's going to be far less than that, in fact. But we actually decided to actually raise our goal to recruit more sailors this year, unlike the other services. So we set the goal at 40,600 because of the shortfalls that we will have at sea.
According to official DoD statistics, the Navy is still shrinking, despite some improvements in recruiting figures. There were 327,000 active duty sailors in the fleet at the end of March, the most recent figures available. That's down 5,000 from the same month a year ago and down 21,000 from 2021. Del Toro says one of the biggest challenges recruiters are still facing is getting access to high school campuses for in-person recruiting events. That became a huge problem during the COVID pandemic and still hasn't been fully resolved.
When you talk to our recruiters, the biggest challenge that they sometimes have is actually getting access to the high schools themselves. So we're working very closely with the Department of Education and with supervisors from across the nation to try to break down those barriers that our recruiters can actually get access to the high schools. Currently, they're being allowed 2 times a year. We want to increase that to about 4 times a year. I've written over thousands of letters to high school principals, in fact, allowing our recruiters back in. That's the number one challenge that our recruiters have in terms of getting to the high school students themselves.
Another new issue has been DoD's implementation of MHS Genesis, the new electronic health record system that reached full deployment earlier this year. Officials emphasize Genesis itself is working fine, but because of its interconnections with other medical providers' databases among prospective service members, more past medical issues are being noticed, and each one of those needs to be resolved, often with additional paperwork, before a new sailor can move through the recruiting pipeline. Admiral Lisa Franchetti is the Chief of Naval Operations.
We've had a lot of discussions about Genesis. Actually, all of the service chiefs and OSD working with DHA, which is the owner of the system, to provide this kind of feedback of where it is potentially slowing things down. And I think that we've made some definite improvements in streamlining the process, in reducing the amount of times people have to go back and get paperwork. And DHA continues to take this feedback. You know, it's a little bit of growing pains with the new system. We're really committed to working with DHA to make sure that it does what it needs to do to get us our recruits into the system as quickly as possible.
The Navy says it's made several organizational changes to help improve its recruiting numbers. For example, the service elevated the commander of its recruiting command to a 2-star admiral position. It stood up a new recruiting operations center to help standardize recruiting processes across the service. It raised the maximum enlistment age from 38 to 41. And borrowing an idea from the Army, it created a new future sailor preparatory course to help prospective candidates meet its standards. But Vice Admiral Rick Cheeseman, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Personnel, insists none of that means standards are lowering.
I'm certain that recruiting will continue to get better as a laser focus on the data behind it. But something you can sort of repeat after me, the Navy is not lowering standards. All right, the standard is you must graduate from boot camp. You must graduate from your A school. Are we allowing more people the opportunity to do that? Absolutely, because we have to and we should. All right, but the standards remain, and we're confident in our force going forward when we do that.
Cheeseman speaking at the Navy League's recent Sea Air Space Conference in National Harbor, Maryland. As Navy officials have delved into their recruiting data, one thing they've noticed is there's a very clear correlation between whether someone agrees to join and whether they've been talking with someone other than a Navy recruiter about the possibility of public service. Because of that, officials are also looking for ways to engage with potential influencers.
In today's environment, it is less so with the recruitable population. They understand it. They want to. Year over year, month over month, we're getting plenty of interest in the United States Navy. Where we lose it is with the influencers. It's become generational a little bit. I need everybody who is associated with the military to talk about a career in the military, to be able to talk to a young person about service. It is our stats are very clear as we dive into the data. It takes 10 cold calls to get a recruit. It's a 10-to-1 conversion rate. If anybody is actively mentoring that recruit, it's a 7-to-1 conversion rate. If the active mentor is associated with the Navy, that's what I track, associated with the Navy, that's active duty, reserve, retired, Navy contractor, government civilian, anybody associated with it, it's a 5-to-1 conversion rate, 50% better. All right, so influencing the influencers is where we need to be. So that outreach isn't just with the younger population. It is with all of us as well, and you all can help us play a part with that.
And Cheeseman says one reason to think that the recruiting crisis is a temporary problem is that once sailors have joined the Navy, they tend to stay. Like the other military services, retention is at near record high levels.
We are crushing retention. Retention in all zones. If I can get a sailor in the Navy, they're generally staying in the Navy. 0 to 6 years of service, about 117% of goal. 6 to 10 years of service, rated 100%. And there's some interesting statistics in there that we're deep diving. And if I can get you past 10, the careerism, well over 100%. So we're good. To your point about the folks who may not be eligible for all types of sea duty, non-deployable things, we are taking a hard look at what other services do before sailors get into the IDES process. To figure out, there's been a culture of if you're not worldwide deployable, you got to go. We're changing that culture. If you can do any job in the Navy, it's a reason for you to stay, and we welcome you to stay. So we're driving towards that.
Jared Serbu, Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.
Check out Jared's story at federalnewsnetwork.com.